welcome back to another episode of this podcast. And Lyra joining us today.
Great to be back.
And this is like a follow-up on the last episode. You know, we were just watching we're doing some video reaction to the podcast Keluar Sekejap by YB, KJ and Syaril Hamdan. And, you know, in that episode, they talk about the kind of government, the kind of Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim is going to be. And they use some very interesting words, right? Like progressive,
Yep.
center-left,
Yep.
redistributions. So all these things, I think, relates to a few things, you know, like concept like big versus small government, concept like federal versus state government. So today I want to do one short series just talking about big versus small government. And now this is something, of course, more prevalent in the Western political discourse.
Yep.
But what comes to your mind when you think about big versus small? I mean, we're not talking about GDP. We're not talking about the strength of military, right? We're talking about the style of government.
I think one of the very thing that came into my mind was really the landmark case of Roe v. Wade.
Yep.
Because what people kept thinking about is my body, my choice. But what they didn't realize the significance of the whole overturning of Roe v. Wade was really the returning of power, of healthcare power back to the state.
Yep.
So that maybe you could just explain a little bit to our audience.
Yeah. I mean, Roe v. Wade, of course, depending what kind of news you've been reading. And I think that most headline would say abortion rights are taken away, women loses right to their own body and things like that. But the Supreme Court of the United States did not do such a thing. All they are doing is, you know, what happened in Roe v. Wade was that the Supreme Court created a constitutional right of abortion, which was not in the document.
And that's not the function of Supreme Court.
Yeah, it's like you're creating law, you know, and it's a bit like UK has its own version, you know, Lord Denning, or people like that. They just kind of say, oh, based on public policy, based on the circumstances of the time, we can create law. And it's always dangerous for judges to create law because that's not their job. It is for the legislature, it's the parliament, it's the Congress to do that. So judges who are more careful wouldn't do that. So Roe v. Wade did that, but then later on, just recently, last year, the Supreme Court overturned that because they say, look, you shouldn't create law. And some more, Roe v. Wade took away the power from the state. So all they are doing was, look, there is no federal right of abortion, but it doesn't mean abortion cannot happen because every state, there are 50 states in America, you can do whatever you want. So this is talking about the power of choices. So let's say California say you can have abortion, New York say you can have abortion, Illinois say you can have abortion. You go and stay there if you like it. If you don't like abortion, because it is a moral issue. And when, you know, we talk about the whole concept of rainbow nation, we have a nation of migrants and melting pot of culture. It's very similar to Malaysia. That's why every time we talk about race and religion, there has to be choices because we all have different preferences. You can't say we all must adopt a certain kind of religion. By the way, our constitution says freedom of religion. But, I mean, Roe v. Wade, basically the reverse of Roe v. Wade, puts the choices in the hands of the state. So imagine you like abortion, right? You go and stay in California. You go and stay in Illinois. You go and stay in New York. You don't like it, you go to stay in Montana. You go and stay in Texas. You go and stay in Florida. Choices. So that's one way for us to understand. It's like how much control and intervention do you want the government to be in your life, in your face?
So when you talk about government, do you mean federal government? Federal versus state? Because what you were saying is that the Roe v. Wade case essentially took the power away from the state to the federal government. So in this case, would you say that in Malaysia, are we more of the former, as in more power to the federal or more power to the state?
Now, when the country was formed, okay, we start with Malaya, right? 1957, the constitution. At that time, the constitution was considered groundbreaking, was considered very creative, very just ahead of its time because they have a whole list of separation, federal and state. So it's like, oh, we respect each other's boundary. But over a period of time, we have seen that the federal become more and more powerful, more and more centralized because they control the purse. And when the Petroleum Act came about, you see some resistance from Sabah and a bit of resistance from Kelantan, but nobody actually went to the court. And then you see how Mahathir destroyed the court and things like that. So we just see that concentrations of federal power. And anytime you go against him, look at the 80s, 90s, Mahathir destroyed the court, destroyed the media, destroyed political parties. So if that is not federal centralization, if that's not federal abuse of power, I don't know what that is. So Malaysia, definitely we have such federal dominance. It is unbelievable. In fact, the noted Professor Terence Gomez even wrote a book called Ministry of Finance Incorporated. And he said we have the most centralized Ministry of Finance in the entire world. Basically, all the GLC are controlled by Ministry of Finance. Ben Negara is controlled by MOF. So we have so much power. And that is one of the arguments that says, look, that is a reason why Najib could get away with YNDB. And of course, YNDB is not even the only case. I mean, think about all the bailout cases. If you want to talk about bailout, it is much worse, right?
Yeah.
You think about Proton, you think about Mars, you think about Perwaja, just a few that we are aware of.
Wow. I mean, it's so interesting because in the last episode, KJ basically said that our Prime Minister is more center-left in terms of his economic policy.
Yep.
So would you think that to be more right-leaning, you are almost always more libertarian in nature, or the other way around, or you have to be more authoritarian in order to have free market, or is it the other way around? Like in this case, he's more center-left. So in order to have certain policies that are being basically like redistribution of wealth, in order to make it happen, would you almost always have to use more authoritarian sort of measures to govern your government, basically?
I think if we look at the example, and we have so many examples, I mean, before World War I, World War II, and even after, I mean, just look at the last 100, 150 years, going all the way back to French Revolution. Look at China Mao, for example, all these things. Every time you want to have a more left economy, so I mean, there are many words to describe. We can call it socialist. Some people don't like socialism because they say, oh, that's discrimination against us. We prefer to call ourselves progressive, democratic left. You notice that all the totalitarian left call themselves progressive, democratic.
Yep.
And we know it's just bullshit, because at the end of the day, you look at the result. So every time you want to say, hey, we're actually redistributing for the people, you need someone with a great power of distribution. That's a very powerful central government. Without that, you can't even implement that. So that's why I find it very, very ironic, because we just did political compass survey and all the discussion. I can't remember if we mentioned it. Switzerland, we say, is one of the most economic right. But in light of the bank scandal and things like that, all of a sudden, the entire banking industry in Swiss has become nationalized. In one moment, they become left.
Yep.
And I know some people won't agree with that, but that's the reality. When government comes in, put in the money, you want to call it bailout, you want to call it nationalized, whatever you want to call it, it is no longer free market. Because, in recovery, in liquidation, we have a term, if you can't pay for money already, all of a sudden you have a white knight to come in. The white knight is actually not very white, because he or she will put the money down and he or she will take control. There is a price for saving.
Yep.
So don't get yourself fooled. The Swiss banking has collapsed as far as we know, because when the government comes in and give guarantee, they don't want to use the word bailout because of the stigma of 2008. But nationalized government guarantee, that's why I was just talking to another friend about economic. We say, okay, you don't want to use the word bailout, but think about 1NDB. It's not a bailout. It's worse. It's government guarantee.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, it has no difference than bailout, basically. But
bailout, at least I give you money, and if you die, you die lah. If I give guarantee, the government underwrites it. The creditor is like laughing to the bank, because they know Malaysia government will not allow it to breach.
But So what will be the implication if, say, Malaysia didn't issue out this government guarantee, though, in the case of 1MDB?
Well, I think in the Malaysian government, Malaysian banking system, economic system, in the eyes of the world, that you have all the standards, it will be downgraded. So even the way we're able to attract investors, things like it will have huge implication. All of a sudden, Malaysia become investor unfriendly. So I don't think that's something anyone would dare to do, least of all Anwar Ibrahim.
But that sounds almost like the people, I mean, being Malaysians, we don't really have other choice except to accept that our government has to issue out this government guarantee, though. I mean, it's almost like the same case with COVID management. In the name of health, for the greater good, we have to give this power to a central committee to basically say what we can do and what we can't do to our body.
And Lara, I think you hit the right point here, in terms of the discussion between big and small. Really, when any party argue for big centralized power, they will use in the name of greater good. So I think COVID is such a great example because I think in the early days, there's still a lot of support. Look at lockdown and things like that. I mean, everyone is like, okay, it's something we had to sacrifice, stay at home, maybe happy or not, whatever. But people sort of are quite willing for the first month, but later on, when the cash run out, when the savings run out, when the opportunity run out, when price increase, I think people are not so happy, not so, what's the right word? It's like they suddenly thought, hey, why am I paying this price? This is your policy decision that causes us to do that. I mean, now you start to have discussion and say that, look, the lockdown was bad because especially all the lockdown that is linked with the vaccine. The vaccine doesn't even work that well. So your whole policy is already flawed. But
the argument would be, well, we acted in accordance with the limited information that we have, and hence we thought we did the best for the country.
Yeah, I remember a few episodes ago, we talked about how people are screaming for amnesty because the fact that they will even use the word amnesty means they knew they screwed up already. So I think it's a lesson for all of us that, look, if we kept encouraging the government to be big, they will continue to be irresponsible. They will continue to be like, hey, based on limited information, we can do this to you. I mean, there's a precedent already. Why can't it be a pandemic 2.0? Next time, it will be some climate change crisis or whatever. And that's why sometimes if you think we're a bit skeptical in this show, it's because the evidence are there. And what we want to encourage people is look at the differences between big and small. So I think in Malaysia, we recognize big, right? Because we have been big for a long time. But what is small? I mean, what comes to your mind when you think about small government? It is definitely not. I mean, one of the example people always use, just look at the cabinet size, right? Malaysia versus United States.
Yeah.
And Malaysia has how many ministers? I know it's trimmed down, still 50 plus, right?
Yep.
And look at the cabinet of the president of the United States, I think less than 15. I mean, their GDP is a few hundred times.
But would you think that people will argue that you need to have accountability between three different branches of the government? I mean, because Malaysia is basically been set out in such a way that we have executive, we have the legislative, but we also have the judiciary. So how do they have that accountability if the government is not big enough? Maybe some people might argue that way.
Yeah, I mean, that would be the Malaysian argument. But then you look at the proponent of small government. So now, of course, I mean, maybe we just talk very quickly about the history of small government because, we always say, look, more power will corrupt, usually. But then, of course, small government is typically linked with the American government because of the founders, the philosophy of the founders, especially someone like Thomas Jefferson. But then they did not start the concept of small government. Limited government, in terms of the Western democracy, actually starts in United Kingdom. It starts with the British Parliament limiting the power of the king to tax. Then, of course, we know what happened. Charles II came out, had the whole thing, and then he was chopped off. The head was chopped off by Oliver Cromwell. And they went into republic for a while, and they sort of have buyer's remorse, so they turn back. So, but they were the one to start it off. So you imagined that many of the founding fathers of United States, they were of British descent. So they saw the system, they knew the king was limited, but they want to go one step further. Even more limitations. So the whole constitution, that's why one of the hallmark of small government is that you have a constitution. And actually, Malaysia, I would say, when we first started off, the aspiration is probably to be a small government.
That's very interesting because we have not seen small government since the formation of Malaysia. But would you think that the concept of small government basically means empowering the people to be accountable of their decision making? I mean, as in like day to day, the right to pursue freedom, the right to pursue happiness, all these things lies in the fact that the government doesn't encroach too much of your privacy, your right to pursue all these things. But people just happily given it away.
Yeah, in theory, it should be like that. But you are absolutely right when you say Malaysia have never seen that. Even though the constitution, I mean, just take the most simple of example, freedom of religion. Is there such a thing as freedom of religion? I mean, now everyone is arguing whether you can visit worship house of the other religion. I mean, what freedom of religion are you talking about? That's in the constitution, but what is the practical effect? So that's why you can say whatever you want. And when we say small government, in fact, Russia has one of the best constitutions in the world, but how do you implement that? Stalin was the one who famously said, I don't care what law you have, I only care who counts the vote.
Wow.
So it is those kind of things, the reality. And definitely you're right. If we want to have small government, people need to be responsible. So, we talk about this in a show. One of the fastest way to get people to be responsible is to have local election. And I know people give all kind of reason why we cannot. Selangor after 10 years, still cannot.
No, I mean, Malaya did start it off with local election. It's just that we lost it along the way and people never saw the light of it.
And I think it's linked with May 13, it's linked with NEP, because when you want that kind of, because NEP is basically shifting the entire economy to the nationalized left realm. Basically, another way to say it is government knows best. I know better than you.
That sounds progressivism.
Yeah, so that's why it goes a full circle. That the original Marxist left, which the so-called liberal tried to fight after World War II, the liberal have become the progressive Marxists because they want to take more control. Their mantra is, I know better than you.
That sounds like pride.
It is. And you see, one of the things from our research, the term we use, when the Roman emperor, at the height of their power, they used to call themselves philosopher king. What does that mean? That means, I know better than you, and you should listen to me. So, there's nothing new on earth. It just kept recycle. So the American experiment is very, very interesting. And that's why, big and small government, I know it's a huge topic. And we already used two examples, Roe v. Wade and COVID. But I think one of the ways which maybe in the next segment we can talk about that will give us even more understanding is just to look at the balance between federal and state power. Because that will really help us to see, where we're heading, because I think this is a concept that we just want to kind of unpack, not too complicated. But I realize that when I talk to people, big and small government, people sort of give you a look, huh? What's that? I mean, in Malaysia, this is not something you hear people talk about. People talk about left, people talk about progressive, but small, it's like doesn't compute.
But if people think of it from the point of view where you're running a company, I think they will get the concept.
Yeah.
You have smaller board. Yeah, very lean, very nimble sort of way of doing things. Then people would begin to appreciate small government.
Yeah, if your turnover is less than 1 million per year, why do you need a board member with 20? Just ridiculous, right?
You need to split the profit.
You think about some of the huge company like Microsoft, Alphabet, their board less than 10. These are countries their revenue bigger than GDP of most nations.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, so I think this is an introduction for big and small, and I think the next segment we want to use federal versus state, and I think we want to think of some other example that will help people to think, and even now, of course, later on we want to talk about, we don't have time in this episode, but we are not saying small is always good because there are pros and cons. I mean, look at the banking crisis now. It is really, now, on one hand, yes, it's uncontrolled free market, but it's also the central bank are not responsible and things like that. So we agree there needs to be some governmental intervention.
Yep.
But I think what most people disagree is how much, what is the degree. And I think that's the same discussion that is going to happen in Malaysia.
I think that will go back to the constitutional right, no?
Yeah, but unfortunately, our constitution has been amended almost more than 600 times. So how do we go back? But we have an opportunity, and that's why the next portion, when we talk about state versus federal, and even what Anwar Ibrahim is doing right now, empowering the Sabah and Sarawak, I think it bodes well with where we're going, and I remain quite positive in terms of what's happening in our nation.
Awesome.
Okay, so I think our time is up. So until next time.
All right.
Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.